This is the Formovie Theatre. It's an ultra short throw projector. It's 4K, supports HDR and Dolby Vision, and it's also got speakers made by Bowens & Wilkins. So let's take a look. In this video, I'm going to be giving you my impressions of this ultra short throw projector. I'm going to be breaking it down in depth and going over the things that you should care about and maybe some things that could be improved. So let's take a look at why this projector is potentially one of the best options available on the market today. So first of all, what is an ultra short throw projector? Very briefly, it's a projector that sits just below where you want the screen to be. Now there's tons of benefits to a projector like this, and there are some disadvantages, and I'll get onto that later in the video. But first of all, let's talk about the design of this thing. Immediately, straight off the back, this is one of the smallest ultra short throw projectors I've seen, and that is a very good thing. Some of these things that you have shining up at your wall or your screen that you have, they're just absolutely massive, and in some circumstances they can be a bit of an eyesore. So having something that's a little bit more compact is definitely a bonus. Now sometimes having it bigger means you can fit in things like better speakers and stuff like that, and I think that despite this being small, that isn't a disadvantage that comes with it. But I will get onto the sound quality later in the video. Now ultimately, I think this thing looks really smart. I do quite like having a sort of darker metal finish, and the fact that when you're going to be using this, you're probably going to be in a slightly darker room. I do think sometimes it can be a little bit distracting to have something that's really bright sat in front of the screen, so that's a definite positive. Now you have the speaker mesh on the front of the projector, and you do have two smaller sort of tweeter speakers on the sides. You have the recess on the top where the lens is, and then at the back of the projector you have all of your ports. Now I think it looks really smart, and I like the fact that it's small. The only thing I don't think is necessarily the best about the design is the fact that you have quite an obvious logo on the front that lights up. Now I think it's good to show that there's sort of power, and you do get that by having a few LED lights come on the front when you turn the thing on. But having the logo shining really brightly, I actually think that takes away from the smart look of this. Ultimately, design-wise, it's nearly perfect, but not quite there. Now, moving around to the back of the projector. Now, at the back, we have sort of all of the standard things we would expect. You do get 3 HDMI ports, which is really good. They're HDMI 2.0 ports, so not HDMI 2.1, but normally on a UST projector, you're not expecting 4K at 120 Hertz signal to be passing through, so not a surprise there. One thing that is a bit of a surprise is that one of the HDMI ports is an eARC port, or Enhanced Audio Return Channel. It's basically just an ARC port, but it's enhanced, so it's slightly better and it handles sort of audio signals better. So basically, if you are going to be plugging this into an external sound system, you are going to be getting the best connection that you can with that port. So big thumbs up. Now other than that, we do have our other standard ports. We've got things like optical audio, Ethernet, USB. So connection wise, it's got everything that you should need. Now this thing is running Android 11, which is the standard for projectors like this. So when you're setting this up, it is very similar to all other sort of Android projectors. So it's fairly easy. It runs through a wizard which goes through that, and it also goes through some of the things like focusing and keystoning. Now that does bring us on to something which is quite important in my personal opinion, and that is focus uniformity. Sometimes with ultra short throw projectors, it does struggle to get the corners in focus, and that's because obviously the corners near the projector are quite close to the projector, and the corners far away are considerably further away than the bottom corners of the screen. So getting it properly focused can be a bit of a challenge on some of these. I have to say, I thought that was going to be the case with this, and when you first power it on and you go to keystone and focus, it can be a bit of an issue to try and focus. It just doesn't seem to get in there. Once the projector's warmed up and you've been using it for a little while, suddenly that then makes it a lot easier to be sharper. I think the problem we have here is that the projector just isn't quite warmed up in time to get that sort of sharp thing when you first boot up the projector. So if this is the projector that you're going to be getting out to use, and it's not going to be a permanent fixture in your home, you do have to bear in mind it will need to be switched on for a little while in order to get that focus perfect when you first get it out the box. So you do have both 4-point and 8-point keystoning, which makes it a lot easier to actually get the screen the way you want it. Now honestly, I wouldn't recommend doing that, because the more you sort of digitally keystone something, the more processes you're adding into that display, which is going to affect the picture. It might not affect it that much, so if you're not really that fussed and you just want to make sure it's flush against your wall and easy to use, then great. But if this is going to be something that is a permanent fixture, I would recommend getting it right with the adjustable legs. If you can get it sort of lined up perfectly just by positioning it physically, it is going to give you the best picture you can get. So Android 11, pretty simple, pretty easy to use. Everything is sort of where you'd expect it to be. You've got a wide array of apps available on the projector, so that is a positive. The only thing I don't like about Android is I feel like it's quite difficult to get to some of your sources quite quickly. So if you're going to be switching between some of your apps and then some of your HDMIs, that is going to be a little bit difficult. It's not going to be a very quick process. Now, this is also hindered by the fact that it is a very simple remote that you get in the box. So there's not a lot of options for shortcuts or things like that. In order to get anywhere, you're going to sort of need to be going home and then getting to that place. That being said, once you're in a HDMI input, if you press the settings button, it brings up this shortcut menu where you can quickly go and see your sources and stuff. But that only comes up if you're in a HDMI input. It doesn't come up if you're just using, for example, Disney+. Now that does bring us on to some of the issues that we have with this. Just like the vast majority of projectors on the market today, it doesn't have a license to be able to run Netflix natively on the projector. So it means if you do download Netflix, which you can do, it's just not going to run any of the titles, which is a little bit annoying. So in order to get Netflix on this, you're going to have to go through a separate input, whether that be a console or like something like a Fire Stick. You could do that. However, you can't run Netflix straight from the Netflix app like you would, for example, Disney Plus or YouTube. Now, one thing that you can do with this and with Android 11 is that you can Chromecast to it. So if you have something that you're watching on a mobile device, you can just Chromecast that straight to the projector, which is obviously a massive plus. So just like most projectors running Android 11, it's pretty similar in that regard. There's quite a few positives, there's a few negatives as well thrown in there, but let's look at some of the real key selling points of this projector, and we're going to start off with the picture. Now, I have tested quite a few ultra short throw projectors, and I have to say that this one is one of the better options that you can get. One of those things is that it does support Dolby Vision, which is a massive plus. I mean, I love watching things on Disney Plus, and a lot of like some of the movies and stuff on there are IMAX, and they use Dolby Vision. So the fact that you can just sort of tap into that to get those best colors, it's really impressive, and the color accuracy is actually pretty good. There's quite a few settings that you can go in to change some of the color accuracy and stuff like that, but I did find that it was fairly decent out of the box. Now, something you do need to sort of go in and have a little fiddle with is some of the brightness settings. Dolby Vision does make it seem a little bit darker when you first turn on, and sort of takes away some of that brightness. And the reason for that is this projector is 2500 ANSI lumens, which is a set amount of brightness. And when you go into something like Dolby Vision, which has a much wider gamut of different colors and brightnesses that it can access, well, in order for it to sort of show that range off in the best way possible, it does have to sort of scale back some of the brightness in order to be maxing out at that 2500 lumens. So if you're going to be using this in a dark room, don't worry about it, don't change anything. Dolby Vision looks great. If you're going to be using this in a slightly brighter room, you probably want to go into the settings and change the Dolby Vision gain up, which you can do, and they've got a little bit of customization there. So if you want to sort of bring up the gain a little bit, you are going to lose some of the low end if you do that, but it's going to give you a brighter image. So you sort of pros and cons. If you're using a projector though, really you should be aiming to be in a dark room. Now, speaking of sort of the low end and the shadows and stuff, this is a pretty decent performer. Again, especially if you're using something like Dolby Vision, it really does make the most of the entire spectrum of different colors. Now, in darker scenes, you can make out details, but that is only going to be if you're in a pitch black room, like with any projector. As soon as you start introducing a bit of ambient light, you're going to be losing out on a lot of shadow detail, and that's no different no matter what projector you're using. But if you have an ALR screen and a projector like this, well, then your shadow detail is going to be pretty impressive. Now, another thing to focus on is motion, and there's a couple of things that they do with this projector which is actually, I think, really positive. So first of all, if you're just going to be running this projector and watching a movie in 24 FPS and you don't sort of do any sort of tweaking with the settings, you're going to get a bit of judder, and I think that's quite normal for any sort of display, but it is quite apparent with this if you have nothing on, and like if you've got a panning shot or something like that, it stutters quite a lot and it is a bit distracting. So this projector does have something called MEMC. Now, I can't remember what the acronym stands for, but what it does is it adds in some extra frames in between the frames that are already in the content, sort of mix them up, if you will. And what that then does is that it reduces the stutter and sort of makes a much smoother image. So for example, I've got this motion test pattern running on the screen, and if I switch on the MEMC, that then sort of smooths it out and makes it a lot more bearable to watch. Now, the test pattern is pretty extreme and it's not going to be that obvious in normal content, but for example, for a panning shot, it makes an absolute massive difference. And there's a difference between not really seeing what's happening and what the details are in a moving shot to suddenly being able to see everything in crisp detail. Now, you do have a risk of artifacts when you do anything like this with motion smoothing, but what this does is it actually doesn't do that bad in terms of artifacts. There are a few, but nothing that noticeable, especially in real-time content. Now, what about sound? One of the massive benefits of a projector like this, an ultra short throw projector, is that because it isn't behind you or above you, but it is directly in front of you, it gives a good excuse to put decent sound in, because then it replaces something like a soundbar. Now, as much as this has an EOC port, which means you can connect high quality sound straight to it through a HDMI port, it has pretty good speakers built in. They're made by Bowens & Wilkins, and they sound really, really good. Now, they're not perfect, and it's not going to replace a dedicated sound system, especially a high-end one, but if you're sort of umming and ahhing about something like this, and all you're going to be getting is the projector, you're not going to be going for an external sound system just yet or ever, then this actually does a fairly decent job. The thing that impresses me most is that it is very loud. I think it's only two 15-watt speakers, but even despite that, they get really, really loud, and you only really need the volume to be pretty punchy and loud at sort of 25%. If you turn it all the way up, it's going to be way too loud. Now, I really like how clear the sound is. I think with some of these systems, they can be a bit bassy and muddy, and having sound that's pretty clear, especially things like vocals and like sort of the details in the sound, having them quite clear is rare. So this is pretty good and it achieves that very well. The only thing it's missing out is that real low end. It doesn't make your seat shake. It's not got proper built-in subwoofer. So it's not going to make your house rumble, but it is okay in terms of bass. So I've got to be honest, pretty solid marks for sound there, but again, not quite perfect. Now, the last thing I want to speak to you about is gaming. Now, it's a bit of a weird one talking about gaming on a projector, because ultimately it's never the best. It's okay for casual gamers, but as soon as you get into any sort of fast reaction type gaming, things like an FPS, it's just a little bit too slow. Now, there's a game mode included and auto low latency mode and stuff like that. So the response time can be pretty good for a projector. It gets to about 40 or so something milliseconds, which is okay for a projector, but it is not perfect, especially for FPS games. And you can find if you're playing a game and you're trying to duke it out with someone, you just feel a little bit out of control, which isn't really what you want. In like a racing game or something that's a little bit more casual like FIFA, you don't really notice it. It's only in those sort of fast pace, turning the camera quickly and getting accurate shots in where you notice it a bit more. So in summary, what do I think of this projector? Well, honestly, it is massively impressive. It's not very often I see an ultra short throw projector supporting things like Dolby Vision, so that's a massive plus. We also get decent sound on this thing. We get a really good picture and a bright, vivid, accurate colours. So I've got to give it pretty high marks. But guys, tell me what you think. Are you interested in buying this projector? Let me know and let's have a little chat about it. And if you want to see another video from me about some of the other ultra short throw options out there, click one of these two videos. Guys, thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.